Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by the Dude Ranchers Association and Golden Wings Horseshoes and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. If you think a day ride on a horse is long, think again. Gillian Larson became the youngest person to solo ride the Pacific Crest Trail, covering over 2,600 miles from Mexico to Canada. And that was only the beginning. Gillian joins Russell and Alan to talk about her amazing adventures long-distance riding around the West.
Okay, morning, Alan. How's everything this morning?
Well, I love to wake up in rainy mornings, and I would lay there and think about days on the ranch that were rainy, that were so precious to us. The rain's so scarce on the ranch that when it does rain, that's the focus, and so I'm just enjoying this a lot.
Well, we were traveling recently, and we got in this antique store. It said, work hard, eat beef, pray for rain. and so we had to buy that. But then I'm also in the tourism business, and folks that came here for our incredible southern Arizona weather aren't always happy when it's raining. So we see both sides of the rain spectrum. But you've been on long rides. Did you do something in the Four Corners or something?
Yeah, I one time went from Wolf Creek Pass up from Durango, Silverton.
To Silverton,
went to
where
Silverton.
The train goes. Wow.
Yeah, and that's right along the top of the Continental Divide. About half our ride was up at 12,000 feet, and loved that, enjoyed that. So I'm excited to have Gillian here today to talk about long distance rides. I don't know why I never did any more. Well, I do know. The week after we got back from that ride, I crashed my airplane and I was crippled for about a year. But
well, that'll do it.
Yeah.
I've ridden up there too, actually. Maybe we'll come back to that. But we're really here to talk to Gillian Larson. She's a long distance rider, and she's going to talk to us about that. She grew up riding in the canyons and hills of Topanga, California. She graduated with a degree in biology from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She became the youngest person to solo ride the Pacific Crest Trail. It covers 2,650 miles from Mexico to Canada. She did it first in 2014, again in 2016. She's ridden the Arizona Trail, the Colorado Trail, didn't know they had one, and the Continental Divide Trail. She's at this point, I think, accumulated more than 10,000 backcountry wilderness miles, and even more importantly, maybe, with the same two horses. She joins us from rainy California. That's been all over the news, and it's leaking on us now. Welcome, Gillian.
Good morning, Alan and Russell. Glad to be here.
We're really tickled to have you today. It brings back so many good memories to me that I'm just thrilled to have you here. How did you get started, Gillian, with this long distance riding? What prompted you?
I was out on a short backpacking trip with my mother back when I was, 21. And this would have been the summer of 2013. And so we were just hiking along, and she had read an article about a woman who had just set the fastest known time for hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And she did it, in under 60 days, which is insane. That's
Wow.
going on 50-mile days. But, the part that was, besides that, astounding to me was that there was even a trail that went from Mexico to Canada. That was kind of the first I'd ever even have heard of the Pacific Crest Trail or anything like that. And so, of course, my first question was, do you think it's open to horses? And so, so we were out there, with no cell reception. And as soon as we got back into cell reception a couple days later, that was the very first thing I Googled was, is the Pacific Crest Trail open to stock? And sure enough, it was. And I don't know, it was just kind of one of those like instant moments of like, yep, gonna do that. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about really horse packing, but that's what I want to do as soon as I get the chance. So that's kind of really what started it.
How was the learning curve? Did you sometimes think, what am I doing here?
The learning curve was awful. It really was. I definitely had no experience with packing, knew absolutely nothing about it. I had really basically no backpacking experience. I said I was out there with my mom, but we were going to like one of those high Sierra camps. So, we didn't have to cook our own food or even set up a tent. They had a cabin up there. So I literally had never even boiled water in the backcountry before, I'm kind of like, we're going to try for this. And it wasn't even this idea of like, it won't be hard. I knew it was going to be hard. And I kind of just knew that I was so naive that I couldn't even really imagine what it would be like. And so I just kept telling myself the whole time was, don't even set expectations because they're going to be wildly off. You are too naive to know how hard this is going to be, and you're just going to have to take it like a day at a time and really try to adapt as you go. So that was kind of the stance I took at it.
My dad had an old saying. He said, you're so dumb you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, basically, that was exactly it. I couldn't, even really plan for it. I remember trying for a couple, weeks at one point, got all these maps and I was trying to figure out how to even plan for it. And I honestly couldn't. It was so hard for my brain to really understand like how to even go about the planning process. So I gave up on that pretty quick after a couple of weeks when, I was still struggling with like the first 100 miles or something. I was like, all right, we're just going to have to wing this, which now is not at all how I do it. Now I plan every single day of my long distance rides, from the comfort of like, my home during the winters. But back then when I just, didn't feel like I had the comprehension of it, I was just like, okay, we're not going to be able to plan for this.
So who taught you how to pack a horse?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, that too. That one, YouTube was great for learning how to pack a horse. That I used a lot of YouTube, and the guy who I bought my pack saddle from, up in Idaho, Outfitters Pack Station, he was very helpful, and I kind of talked to him on the phone, and he suggested like a packing book, which is Mules Wear Diamonds, and that's a very funny beginner friendly book that teaches you quite a few hitches, and so between kind of him telling me how to some steps for how to teach one of my horses how to pack, and then that book and YouTube, I kind of got something going. And then after about 1,000 miles, I ran into my first actual packer, and he was able to give me some tips on what he thought would be the best hitch for what I was using. And then I've used that hitch ever since, and ran into another packer in Yosemite that gave me like a last cinch that I needed for my box hitch that I was doing. And yeah, eventually all the pieces came together, but it was not pretty to start, not at all.
So we need to kind of, first of all, I love the title. I've never heard of it, Mules Wear Diamonds. So a lot of our listeners will know, but some of them won't, that the diamond hitch is a famous, I think for lack of a better term, it's a knot, and it can be a little complex, and it's one of the ways that you secure the load on a pack horse or a pack mule. And I'm a dude rancher, and I grew up around and been around a lot of folks that do dude ranching in areas that are more inclined to do pack trips. Not a lot of packing here in Arizona, some, but not a lot. And so I learned early on just by osmosis that I didn't want to do anything that resembled packing. And because it was never, and of course no one tells the day about that we were out 2 weeks and nothing happened, which probably never happens anyway. But, they all had their horrible wreck stories, and,
Oh, right.
And
I know.
And it involves multiple animals, and
That's the key there too. It's always the fact that they have so many animals. It's like this domino effect. That's what always causes these wrecks.
Yeah, and just horrible stories. So I'm going to leave packing to you.
Well, this outline says you have a horse you ride and a horse you pack, and you do all that in twosomes. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, that was my strategy until about 2019, when my main horse that I had done all those rides with passed away. And then that kind of, was definitely a very tragic moment, and kind of had to restart, and find a whole bunch of new horses again, because I still have yet to find again that magical horse that could kind of take her place. My original pack horse has kind of now taken her place, and I have which was her son. They were mother and son, and the mother passed away in 2019. And then I've been riding her son a lot because he's just so experienced. And then I picked up a mule in 2019 and been packing her, and she's a really good packer. It took her a while though. She had this horrible fear of hikers, and it would always be the first hiker of the day that we would come across, she would immediately bolt, and I'd have to go catch her. And so it took us a while to get to the point where she was safe and kind of reliable. Has her moments once in a while, but for the most part gotten a lot better. But it was definitely this process of kind of starting up again from ground zero. You even felt below ground zero compared to the first time, because at least when I did my first Mexico to Canada ride, at that point I had my mare for 9 years, and I'd had her son for 7. So I had a really solid foundation with the two of them. And then in 2019, have to start again with horses that were not even broke to ride. That took me a while. At least that was the upside of the pandemic, wasn't doing too much anyways in 2020. So I was able to really focus on my horses, and I ended up buying, I think I bought 7 horses in 2020. Kind of blacked out there for a while. So I have quite a big herd now, and we moved up to the Central Coast that year. So we got some more land from when we used to live in Topanga. We only had a half acre in Topanga. And so that was part of the reason for relocating up to the Central Coast, was to have a bigger property. And once we got that bigger property, of course, that horse brain of mine was oh, wow, look at all this space. We should fill this with a mass amount of horses. And now we have 8 head of horses. I have 3 youngsters and 5 adults.
So I grew up hearing that people use mules in places like the Grand Canyon because they were more sure-footed. Mm-hmm. And, and I have very limited mule experience, and what I've had doesn't necessarily support that. But I read an interesting article that said that mules being half donkey versus a straight equine, that this article's theory, and so I'm gonna give it to you, and then you tell me if you think it's, because now you have the mule, which your experience with the fear of hikers sort of contrasts with what I'm about to say. And that was that donkeys evolved on the mountains, and so when they feel threatened, they face and assess the threat, where horses basically evolved on the plains, and their answer to a threat was run, because they had the space, and that's what they did. And they might have been bigger than the threat, but that's what horses do. We know that. Mm-hmm. So this article's whole thesis was that's the reason that people like mules in these rugged Grand Canyon-like drop-off type trails, because the mule won't overreact and go over the edge. And, I've heard the stories of the horses and sometimes the mules that will do that. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I heard that as well, that, mules are not spooky as much, or sometimes that's at least the one of the advantages people say of getting a mule. That has definitely not been my mule. My mule's a
that's
coward.
What it sounds like.
My mule's definitely a coward, and she's definitely a bolter, and she has great self-preservation where she herself will never get hurt. I have no doubt that I've never seen this mule bleed. I've had her now for several years, and I've yet to see her bleed. She manages to never hurt herself. But she will take out anyone else in her path that is between her and like safety. So she might knock every other horse off the cliff in her, determination to get away from something that scares her. So that's where, you have to be careful, at least I feel like, around my mule. I'm always very cognizant of like where I have her in relation to myself and my horses. And, something like if we have a hiker coming up behind us, it's like they're coming up behind my mule, I then have to be aware of that, because that could possibly trigger my mule to then kind of run up on my horse. And so thankfully we don't usually get passed from behind very much. That works pretty well. And she's gotten, again, so much better that she doesn't have these episodes anymore. I packed her I actually finished just this last summer my third ride on the Pacific Crest Trail. So I was out there from April until end of September. And I have now kind of 5 riding horses and 4 in the mule. And I kind of rotated them throughout this last ride, because I have the same pack horse from my past rides who I was this year riding a lot. But my others are not really, at the same level that my mare who passed was. And so just to make everything easier on the horses, I decided rotating them throughout my ride would be beneficial. And even if I had 2 really solid horses, I'd probably still do that now that I have the resources. Anything that makes such a difficult trip easier on the horses is usually what I try to do. But anyhow, so I took the mule at one point through the Mojave Desert this last summer, and there's a lot of lack of water, and there were so many hikers. At one point, myself and I think about 40 hikers, we were all camped at the same spot along this dirt road, because there's a big stretch out there of 40 some odd miles that doesn't really have any water. And so the locals stashed a water cache of up to 800 gallons of water for us. And so everyone kind of plans on camping at that location. And so, at one point, there's myself, my mule, my horse, and 40 hikers all camped along this dirt road. And she was great with having so many hikers, especially in our camps at nighttime. So I think she's finally started over her hiker phobia, or stranger danger, whatever it was. But so that was our last summer. We spent all summer out there on the Pacific Crest Trail again. Clearly I have an addiction problem to that trail.
What kind of what gait do you ride in when you're on the trail? How do you travel?
All at a walk. It's very slow. I'm happy if we average 3 miles per hour. That's always, kind of like the tentative goal that I try to average, or how I think about my miles per day. Usually I'll tack on an extra 2 hours or so to my ETA, especially if I think that we're going to be in some country that might be a little more treacherous, like the Sierra Nevadas. That's really rocky. That slows us down a lot just in terms of the terrain. Sometimes elsewhere, where there's a lot of, lack of maintenance on the trail, I expect to hit, a lot of down trees and to be having to kind of saw my way through. So I always expect to add on some hours in that kind of country. So if it's great maintained trail, not too difficult, we'll average 3 miles an hour. Otherwise we do less.
So the Pacific Crest Trail, you must see everything then. You were saying the Mojave Desert was part of it, and the Sierras are part of it. So you're seeing the diversity of California. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, basically the trail kind of traverses along, I think, like 7 different mountain ranges or something like that. Or it's definitely kind of like the spine. Wherever the highest points are, you can pretty much guarantee that the trail is going to be aiming right for it. So yeah, we definitely see quite the diversity between the deserts, and then, a lot of above tree line in the Sierra Nevadas, kind of more the foresty Northern California and Oregon, and then back up to the Cascades in Washington. Yeah, it's very diverse.
Do you try to do wet camps always?
Yeah, except for in the I always camp with water regardless, just because, the risk of an impaction, colic situation. So I always make sure I have water in camp. But definitely in the desert, there's such long stretches at times between water sources, or where there is water sources, you can't really camp at. It might literally just be this like pipe, stuck into a spring on the side of a mountain. You can't really camp at it. So I then have to plan about trying to figure out how to get water towards the area. So especially, when I was riding the Arizona Trail or in Southern California, there's pretty regular dirt road crossings. Almost daily you'll cross a dirt road at some point, or a paved road. And so if I was concerned about water for camp, on a day off, I would drive ahead and like cache water at these road crossings. I have these collapsible water jugs that are 5 gallons, and I would cache 15 to 20 gallons. And then when I would ride through, I would basically have to camp alongside this road, and then pack up my little collapsible water jugs onto the pack mule, and then continue on the next day. So that's kind of how I would deal with the lack of water, is I would just have to fold it into my planning.
So you have some support as you go along. You have somebody kind of keeping track of you and meeting you at certain places, and
yeah, it depends. Definitely along the Pacific Crest Trail, when I used to live in Topanga, I would kind of plan the really dry stretches of the Pacific Crest Trail to coincide with like my mom's weekends. So she was a teacher, and she would teach Mondays through Thursdays. So starting like Thursday night until, Sunday morning, she could kind of come out to the Pacific Crest Trail and meet me. And so I would kind of coincide the really dry stretches with meeting up with her. And maybe someday during that week, I would take a day or two off, to rest the horses. So I would, be able to mostly have her support in the dry areas. And then about the time I got to the Sierras and got too far north for her to help me, we had good water sources. But then that was kind of my first ride. And then obviously, wanted kind of a more reliable, I guess, way to be supported on trail, especially when I got further east out in Arizona. I did the Arizona Trail after the Pacific Crest Trail. And so there I had like 2 trucks and trailers, and I would do like a leapfrog system where, I'd be moving, the rigs one at a time, leapfrogging them over themselves, and then I would ride between the rigs. So it's like if I dropped a rig, say mile 100, and I would then take my, or mile 0, I would then take the second rig up to mile 100, ride southbound from the, rig at mile 100 to mile 0 over 4 days, load the horses up into the rig that's at mile 0, and drive it north to the rig at, to mile 200. And as I'm driving up to mile 200, if there's any places along the way that don't have, good water, I can then take the time to drop off some water caches. So that way, I could kind of do everything on my own. I could resupply myself. I could drop water caches. I could have rigs. And so that was kind of how I got around, being able to be self-supported out on trail. And
well, we need to
my mom's retired.
What's that? Oh, your mom's retired.
Yeah, now she's retired. So now I have more reliable help that she's retired.
So
for a while there, that was my system. I've kind of done a little bit of it all.
Wow. Well, we have to take a break. I want to just ask one last question before we do that. Yes. When you're having to cache this water, what are you allocating per horse per day? What gallonage?
It definitely about like 15 to 20 gallons total. So that'd be, 7 to 10 gallons per horse. And it kind of just depends where the last water was that they had beforehand, how thirsty I think they might be in camp. But we've always been able to get by with like 10 gallons per horse at nighttime in camp.
Perfect. All right. And we're going to take a break. Today's episode is brought to you in part by the Dude Ranchers Association. This is the association that's been going since 1926. Our family's, Stephen's on the board, and our family's been involved for probably 30 years, and the ranch for even longer. We just are big believers. This is the association that represents and carefully, the new word I guess is curates the original Western adventure vacation. that is, of course, centered around horseback riding, great food, comfortable accommodations, and that special brand of Western hospitality that Dude Ranchers put together. This is the time now to plan the summer vacation and consider the West's first destination vacation. It's just the perfect vacation for families because there's so many things to do, so many activities, and some independence for the kids. They can get out and do a lot of things without their parents having a tight leash on them. It's also a great place for couples and single people. It's a safe destination for people traveling alone. Gives you a chance to get out in nature, get on the horse, hike. Some ranches have UTVs, ATVs, e-bikes, mountain bikes, shooting, climbing, archery, rafting. There's some great river trips on some of these ranches. And what you need to do is go to www.duderanch.org. That's .org, duderanch.org. And there's over 90 member ranches that have jumped through all the hoops that they need to be included in the Dude Ranchers Association. And the association is also very good at helping you if you're a little unclear. The website's terrific, but if there's questions you have, you can call the association. The number's on the site. And, a venture awaits. Come find your inner cowboy today.
Well, when you're out on the trail, you know where you're going to camp. What do you think you can average? 3 miles an hour for your trips?
Yeah, so we average about 3 miles an hour, and mileage total wise, I usually try to hit, 20 to 30 miles a day. Every once in a while, again, because I'm kind of making my camps based on the water sources and ideally grazing. Sometimes we'll do high teens or, up to mid 30-mile days. So sometimes we're covering pretty high mileage per day. I know one time I got food poisoning during one of my days off on trail up in Sisters, Oregon area. And I was on a really tight time crunch because my mom had taken one of my trucks to go up to a family reunion in Idaho. And she was meeting me to bring back one of my trucks. And then I was taking her to a flight to fly out of bed. So it was this random weird time crunch. And I got so sick. And so I missed a day of riding. And now I had to do it was 90 miles in 50 hours or something. So I remember that being one of my tightest time crunches and not feeling very good either when I got back on the horse. Hadn't eaten for 2 days, and we got on trail at 3 p.m. and had to ride until 11 p.m., camp, get up the next morning, ride another big day. So yeah, sometimes we'd pull some very long, hard days on trail.
How did you get started in all this?
Just wanting, I think, something that would be an adventure at the heart of it. I had finished my undergraduate degree or was getting towards the end of it and just was feeling a little burnt out on school. And I was enrolled to start grad school in the fall of 2014. So kind of knew I had more ahead of me and really wanted something to do that, interim period between the winter of 2013 and the fall of 2014 that would be memorable, and decided when I heard about the Pacific Crest Trail, that was what I wanted to do. And unfortunately, I kind of got hooked on it. and it definitely just changed my life, getting to be out there in those mountains with my horses.
So, Gillian, you're sitting in a group at the campfire with a bunch of my grizzled Dude Ranch buddies who have pack trip stories that turn my hair gray at 25. And what story are you going to tell them?
Oh boy. I guess I think the only time that I was really fearful for one of my horses was I was in the High Sierra and I was doing the John Muir Trail. I was going southbound from Yosemite, and my plan was to go southbound from Yosemite till just a little bit before the junction to Mount Whitney, and then I was going to head west on the High Sierra Trail. It was supposed to be about a 3-week trip. I had set some resupplies at pack stations, and so I was doing, almost the whole thing without meeting my mom. I met her at one location. I rode out of Kearsarge Pass, which is near Lone Pine, California, to meet her for my last resupply. And so I'd met her. I'd had a shoe come off the day that I was coming out to meet her. So I got that tacked on in Bishop, and she set me back on trail on a Monday. And then I camped that night, woke up on Tuesday morning, and set off on trail, got to camp Tuesday night. And as we were going out throughout the day on Tuesday, my gelding was just a little bit off. This was in 2019. And so it was my first pack trip with my mule, and I was riding my gelding, who I've had since birth. And he was just, not quite his spunky self. He was walking fine, but we stopped for lunch and he wasn't really interested in eating. He kind of just dozed, which was a little not like him. And it was a short day for us. We did about 14 miles, but we went over Forester Pass, which is the highest pass in the Sierra. Got to camp that night. And I would say within a couple hours of getting to camp on that Tuesday night in a meadow, that was about a half mile off trail, his leg just blew up on me. It just got so swollen so quickly. I think within those couple hours, he was not weight bearing on this leg. It was about, 2 to 3 times the size it should have been, all the way from his hoof up to, up above his hock. And it seemed primarily like a lot of the infection or swollenness was in his hock area. I couldn't find a cut on him anywhere. I couldn't figure out why his leg had blown up. We hadn't had anything go wrong that day. It was a huge, concern and mystery to me as what was happening. But I could tell with his lethargy and with how he was behaving that he had some sort of fever and thus an infection. So I knew he had an infection going on. And I could tell we weren't going to be able to get out of this situation. From where we were camping that night, the only exit points to get out of was either to go back the way we came, which was about 25 miles and up and over Forester Pass, which is, again, the highest pass in the Sierra, or to go south to Horseshoe Meadows, which is about 24 miles, but pretty level, no really difficult climbs. And so that was kind of the obvious exit point for us, but he was absolutely not weight bearing. And so I texted my mom on my satellite device that we, needed antibiotics for my horse to try to bring down the infection and try to control some of the swelling. And so she, got some antibiotics from my vet, and she drove out on Wednesday. Was it Wednesday or Thursday? I think she drove out on Thursday. So she got the antibiotics on Wednesday, drove out on Thursday to Whitney Portal, and then she hiked all the way up. She started at about noon. She hiked up and over Trail Pass, which is right there by the summit of Mount Whitney. So she had this crazy elevation gain. It took her 7 hours to go, I think, 10 miles. Wow. And she hiked until 2 a.m. She did 18 miles carrying a backpack with a horse blanket for my gelding because the temps had kind of dropped, and with his fever, he was having a hard time regulating his body temperature. So she had a horse blanket in her backpack. She had standing wraps to try to put some compression on his legs. She had antibiotics. So she hiked till 2 a.m. and during this time when she got to about the top of Trail Pass, she also had a satellite device, and her satellite device just started malfunctioning on her and was no longer working. So she had enough cell reception up there to kind of send me a text being like, I'm coming, but my satellite device is being weird. And that was kind of the last I heard from her. And I was supposed to meet her at a trail junction because I was camped off of the trail, not right on side it. So she couldn't really find me very easily. But with our satellite devices not working, hers not working, we couldn't, connect. And so we were supposed to meet, that night that she was hiking in till 2 a.m. We were supposed to meet that night, but that didn't happen because of the, her getting real slowed down by how bad the terrain had been, and then the satellite devices not working. So didn't meet with her that night. The next morning, I hike out to the trail from my camp to look for her, and she's kind of looking for me, and she took a wrong trail junction at one point because some people, kind of told her, oh, maybe some horses are camped down in this meadow. She kind of went the wrong way. I managed to hook up with her eventually, though, later that morning, and then we gave my horse some antibiotics. My mom hiked out the next morning, and I was still there for another day, and then had to start hiking out with my horse. The inflammation had come down just enough that he could kind of, use that leg to support some weight when we were walking. And he could walk somewhat normally on it, except for if we were kind of going up and down stairs, which there's a lot of stairs in the Sierra. So every once in a while we'd have these stairs, and he would kind of then have to like one-legged hop up it with his hind leg. So we eventually made it after almost a week of kind of being stuck in the Sierra. We finally got out and immediately took my horse into the emergency vet, and he had gotten some sort of really bad infection somehow in his hock and into like the joint capsule. And even the vets are not quite sure how it managed to get into the joint capsule, because usually, even if they have a cut elsewhere on their body, like to get the infection into the joint capsule takes usually like direct trauma. So it's still a mystery how it happened, but he was in the hospital for 10 days, and they had to completely knock him out and invert him to like drain the infection out of his hock. And in the process of us hiking out, these 24 miles and having that massive infection, they kind of like weakened two of his ligaments in his hock that he ended up being severed. And so all in all, he spent like 10 days in the hospital, and then it took us about 13 months of rehab before he was rideable again. Because that was really scary. And I was very concerned when we were out there that, he was going to kind of succumb to this massive infection that he had. So I'm very grateful that he made it and he recovered, and he was, my main horse this last summer on the Pacific Crest Trail. So very, very grateful. But yeah, that was the scariest moment. And especially, not even knowing how it happened is also a little nerve-wracking. And I actually now carry oral antibiotics with me on trail, if I'm out there for more than a day or two, just because I don't want anything like that to happen again.
Do you take students out to teach them this long distance riding?
Not necessarily yet out on the backcountry, just because that is obviously a lot of, takes special students. Once in a while, I'll do certain things with the right student. But in general, I've kind of been offering like workshops at this point, where I kind of teach people how to plan, how to get into the backcountry. I've worked them out of the Central Coast here. And we go over basically a lot of trip planning. So how to read topographic maps, how to use a topographic map to plan campsites, how to research trails and, be able to plan your trip appropriately and feel prepared, how to go over stock containment, like what kind of containment based on the terrain that you're traveling in, how to plan for the nutrition side of things, like whether or not you'll have enough grazing or if you need to bring along supplemental feed. And then obviously some of the more hands-on stuff, like setting up electric vents, doing high lines, teaching hobbling, packing, or if you're wanting to just single horse pack, because that's definitely a big thing too, is, not everyone has multiple horses or all the equipment for packing. And so sometimes learning how to really strip down your gear to the basics and just go out with one horse and do an overnight or two is kind of where people are more at. So I also try to cater to that audience and, really just simplify things for a variety of people and arm them with a spectrum of tools so they can then kind of cater it to what's their system, whether they have a pack horse or not, whether they're camping in the desert or not, and more in the mountains. So that's usually what I focus on in my workshops.
So Gillian, you have a really impressive website. And
thank you.
And it was, I didn't go through every little bit because I know that I don't want to ride for 2,650 miles. So
well, that's okay. You don't have to ride for that long. It's meant to help for anyone. If you want to even just go out for an overnight, that's always where people have to start.
Yeah, no, I've done a lot of riding, but I really like beds and flush toilets and hot showers, and I'm really spoiled that way. But it is really an impressive website, and is this, and I don't have the name of that website. Could you give it to us before I forget to ask?
Yeah, it's GillianLarson.net.
Okay. And just
So
Gillian
my name and then
Larson.
.net. Mm-hmm. And they can also find me too on Instagram. My Instagram handle is thru, so THRU_rider. And even if you just pop that into Google, that sometimes pops up, my website or my Instagram. So that sometimes is a pretty easy way to find me, is if you Google thru-rider, that usually pops me up somewhere.
So Gillian, is this a business for you, or is it just really your hobby / inspiration?
It's definitely not making up my income at this point. It helps a bit here and there. Slowly, it's kind of leaning more towards it. My dream career would be to kind of be a teacher at like a community college in ag sciences or at a university. I like teaching. That's definitely a big passion of mine. So being able to do these workshops is kind of, helps scratch that itch a little bit and kind of keeps my foot in the door. And
Sure.
I might continue expanding it. I actually hopefully have an online version, like a video series of my workshops that I'm hoping to put out soon, because it's obviously a big travel concern for a lot of people. Since I'm kind of based here in the Central Coast, I then can't necessarily access, people that are more than, a day's drive or so from my location. So I'm hoping to release a video series very soon that was basically, an online version of my workshops, has the same information, has videos of how, to do certain things like setting up electric fence. So that's kind of the next step. So yeah, the business is slowly growing, but it hasn't definitely fully taken flight, I would say.
How are you with horseshoeing? Russell here is a world's best horseshoer, and I admire him a lot, and I'm wondering how you keep shoes on your horses.
That's a good question. Yeah, I am not a world-class horseshoer, that is for sure, and I don't pretend to be. I usually kind of rely on, usually having an idea of where my horses will need new shoes, like every 500 miles or so. And I'll kind of do some research online or call up some vet clinics and get some recommendations on farriers. And so I'll kind of know who I have in mind. And then I'll have some hoof boots on me in case we lose a shoe when we're on trail.
Sure.
So that way I can put a hoof boot on.
Yeah.
And then again, it helps. I have this, satellite device that allows me to text. And so if I lose a shoe on trail before I'm expecting it, I'll send a text to my mom, and she'll have hopefully, internet, she'll be at home or something. And then she can kind of, while I'm still out there and working my way out to a trailhead, she can, call up some farriers and start having someone lined up for me. So
Sure.
that way, as soon as I get out to the trailhead, she has a name and an address for me to haul my horses to get the shoe taken care of promptly. So for the most part, that's worked out well for us.
Sure.
Every once in a while it's a headache, but it's been working.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the boot. That's a great emergency solution. I have a question. When my son was 17, Stephen, he and 3 Wranglers were going to ride the Arizona Trail, and it was pretty new, and it was not even complete. And you talk about...
What year was it again, did you say?
Oh, so he's 30, it was 17 years ago. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that I think it was only completed in like 2011 or something. So yeah, that would have been before it was completed. Yeah.
So Stephen wisely, because he was getting set to go to college and he had some other stuff going on, he finally, at the end, he had a moment of wisdom and opted out. But the other 3 went, and they had quite the adventure. What's that trail like now, Arizona Trail?
I would say the Arizona Trail was one of the rockiest trails I've ever been on, at least in the first, southern half, like from the Mexican border up till probably about Pine, Arizona. It is so rocky. It like blew my mind, and the climbs are pretty steep and the descents are steep. It's very, very rugged trail. Beautiful though. I really loved it. Definitely the lack of water, is a bit concerning at times, and there's not a whole lot of grazing. So I had a lot of logistics that I had to, keep in mind for that trail, just to make sure my horses were comfortable. But especially the southern part of Arizona is just stunning, and like how diverse it is, going up over Mount Lemon, there were some snow patches up there. quite a bit of snow that we hit on the north side of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon was stunning. I really liked the Arizona Trail. It's definitely just one of those trails, though, that it's a lot more enjoyable if you have a strong strategy, when it comes to the logistics of resupplying and dealing with the lack of water and lack of grazing. And as long as you have that kind of armed with you, then I think the trail's pretty enjoyable. If you don't have a strong resupply strategy, then it could be uncomfortable for sure at times.
You pack grain with you when you travel?
Yeah, not necessarily just grain. I don't pack too much grain, but I pack, it's almost like little dehydrated hay bales or hay flakes. They call them hydration hay. Yeah. So I pack that. And then I'll also pack along kind of a mix of alfalfa pellets, senior, and rice bran, which is really high fat, high protein. And so I find that supports my horse's bodies really well. So they get their roughage, a lot from the hydration hay that I pack, and then they kind of get the real nutrition dense feed from the concentrates that I bring. But yeah, not a lot of grain, mostly senior and rice bran for the high calorie stuff.
Yeah, our horses work real hard. I mean, nothing works like you're describing, but our horses work hard, and we certainly use both those for the exact same reasons, and use pretty high quality alfalfa for the same, just calories and protein and fat and all those things that a horse that's standing around watching the world spin doesn't need or shouldn't have, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're done as we do. We've gone over time, so we're gonna we're gonna wrap it up, and it's been great. Gillian Gillian Larson, all together, I think you said .net.
Yes.
And this is a website that's really worth going through. I mean, I don't know who did it, but it's I know a little bit about websites, and it's a nice one, and it represents you well.
Thank you. Yes, if anyone needs a website designer, I can hook them up with my friend who did mine. So if anyone needs that as well, I'll send along the information.
So get with
Gillian.
What?
Do you ever get to Tucson?
I do. I'm actually going to be out that way later on in February. But yeah, mid-February, I'm heading out towards the Tucson area.
Would you contact either Russell or me, and we'd be happy to get together?
Sounds great.
We'll take you for a short ride.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's okay.
Yeah, you don't need your sleeping bag.
Crazy.
We'll do 3 or 4 miles, not 3 or 4 miles an hour. We'll do 3 or 4 miles. So it's been great.
Good time.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in February.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Gillian. Bye.
Mm-hmm.
Alan and I always want to thank Golden Wings Horseshoes for sponsoring the Cowboy Up podcast. These revolutionary horseshoes they're like no other. I've tried the other plastic shoes for 40 years, and they've always failed. Huge disappointment. Golden Wings are the ones that have put several of our horses back to work, and maybe most importantly, made them happier. And one of our guests told us that she had to retire her mounted shooting horse, and with Golden Wings he was back to work. The concussion absorption, it just is in the greater flexibility. It just makes critical difference. It's much more like being barefoot. And from a farrier's perspective, in my own experience, they're really easy to put on, and no time at the anvil, and they just really go on quickly and easily, and the horses love them. We have a horse that's back working, going on those 20-mile all-day rides, and he hadn't worked for, 2 or 3 years. They also take the place of pads, so those horses that we increasingly see with sort of soft soles and some of the arthritic changes that of course horses and everybody else gets too, these shoes really help out. So Golden Wings horseshoes, you can go to their website, goldenwingshorseshoes.com. goldenwingshorseshoes.com. You know, Alan, you were talking about your ride up in the Four Corners and around Durango, Silverton, and I just it made me think of a quick story. I was mid-20s, and as a favor, we'd leased some horses out to a ranch out there on that railroad. And you could ride a horse, hike, or take the railroad into this ranch. It's not there anymore. It was called All Wilderness. And we were staying there, and these two female wranglers that were white stallion wranglers that were working there and taking care of our horses wanted to take me and my friend up above tree line and show us these beautiful alpine lakes. So we're up there, and, you know, it's above tree line, so there's no trees, and you see these vast expanses. It was spectacular. It was unbelievable. And I look up, and there's a big cross on the mountain. And I said, what's that big cross? Oh, that was where lightning struck a trail ride and killed 6 horses and 3 people. Okay, well, that's tragic. And we keep riding, and, you know, an hour later, the lightning strike. And, you know, we're the only thing above 3 feet. And I'm laying over my saddle horn hoping that somebody else is taller than me, and these women they're just fearless, and the lightning's crashing and the hail is falling, and we can't wait to see this alpine lake. And I just wanted to get off that mountain so bad, but obviously I did, and I'll never forget that ride.
I had the same experience, and I was way above the tree line up by Durango and hit a lightning storm, and I thought I'm never going to make it off this mountain. And I was never so glad to get off that mountain.
Did you see the cross?
No, I don't remember the cross.
But, my God.
Yeah.
Well, we were in a little different area. That was not inspirational at the time.
Well, makes me glad to be here today.
Yeah, me too.
All right, friends, thanks for joining us. A Cowboy shout out to Stan Houston and his wonderful production company. You can listen to past episodes of our show. Just tune in to the Cowboy Up podcast on Apple, and while you're at it, give us a rating, or visit our website at cowboyuppodcast.com. And be sure to join us next week for more talk about the West. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to stand tall and ride safe.